And allow me now to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. And I think they're going to present in this particular order too. Dr. Paolo Bolaños is a full professor and member of the Department of Philosophy, University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines. He headed the department from 2011 to 2019. He also served as a professor of philosophy at the UST Graduate School from 2013 to 2020. Bolaños is a research fellow at UST's Research Center for Culture, Arts, and Humanities, or RCCA. And he obtained his AB Philosophy from UST, MA in Philosophy from Brock University in Canada, and his PhD in Philosophy from Macquarie University, Australia. His research and teaching interests are mainly in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, Theodor Adorno, Gilles Deleuze, Frankfurt School Critical Theory, and Post-Marxism. Bolaños is the founding editor-in-chief of two philosophy journals, Critica, an online journal of philosophy, and Suri, Journal of the Philosophical Association of the Philippines. He is also a member of the editorial boards of various academic journals such as the Antoninus Journal, Diwa, Social Ethics Journal of Applied Philosophy, and the Favis Minda Journal. Bolaños is a member of the Philippine Academy of Philosophical Research, or PAPR. He is the author of two books on affirmation and becoming, a Deleuzean introduction to Nietzsche's Ethics and Ontology, published by Cambridge Scholars in 2014, and Nietzsche and Adorno on Philosophical Praxis, Language and Reconciliation Towards an Ethics of Thinking, published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2020. Dr. Jacqueline Cleovas is an assistant professor in the Humanities Department of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Previously, she was a tenured faculty member at the Ateneo de Manila University. She earned her PhD in philosophy at the National University of Singapore. Her specialization is in ethics, especially moral psychology and practical ethics. Most of Dr. Cleofas' recent research involves virtue theory. She also does work in Asian philosophy, more specifically on early Confucian thought and Filipino philosophy. Dr. Cleofas has more than 10 years of experience in graduate and undergraduate education, having taught ethics to undergraduates in a research paper writing course for graduate students. Ms. Rowena Azada-Palacios is an assistant professor of philosophy at Ateneo de Manila University, where she has been on the faculty for more than 20 years. She is currently completing her PhD at the University College London, where she has taught on undergraduate modules in philosophy of education. Her latest research work is on the educational implications of anti-colonial political philosophies, and she was previously a board member and esteemed colleague of mine at the Philosophical Association of the Philippines, and is currently active in a number of global philosophy of education organizations, as well as the Women Doing Philosophy Network. And together with Dr. Rodrigo Abenes of Philippine Normal University, she is currently busy organizing an online philosophy of education conference, which will be held this August of 2021. Dr. Mia Valverde, on the other hand, is the chair of the Department of Philosophy and a member of the University Research Council from the Ateneo de Davao University. Dr. Ruby Suazo, on the other hand, teaches philosophy courses at the University of San Carlos, Cebu City. He is also the current chair of the Department of Philosophy of the University of San Carlos and the Research Ethics Committee of the same university. He received his MA and PhD in philosophy from Christ the King Mission Seminary in Quezon City and the University of San Carlos, Cebu City, respectively. He has published articles mainly on Paul Ricoeur, political philosophy, and Filipino philosophy. And lastly, we have Reverend Father Prudencio Edralin, who finished his bachelor in philosophy at San Pablo Major Seminary in Baguio. As a seminarian, he pursued his theology studies at the University of Navarre in Spain, where he earned his bachelor in theology. He was ordained priest on the 8th of November, year 2000. Father Dennis, as we call him, earned his master's and doctorate degree in philosophy from the Pontifical University of Santo Tomas in 2008 and 2015, respectively. He occupies various key positions in Lyceum of Aptari, such as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Registrar and Research Director. He is also Director of Thomas Aquinas Major Seminary School of Philosophy in Lyceum of Aptari. Friends, our distinguished speakers, and we shall begin with Dr. Paolo Bolaños. While Dr. Bolaños is preparing, may I remind our audience to kindly mute your microphones so as not to interrupt the presentations. Thank you very much.
All right. Hello. Good morning. Thank you, Floor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
All right. May I be allowed to share my? I'm going to share basically my paper for today. So okay. So can you see the screen? I mean, my screen.
Yes,
Is it
Doc.
all right? Is it readable?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. I'd first like to say good morning and welcome to the last session of our celebration, conference, uh, our conference celebrating the 10th year anniversary of our department. I would like to thank the members of the panel this morning, uh, Dr. Jacqueline, Rowie, Dr. Vida, Dr. Suazo, and Father Dennis. And I'd like to thank them because they agreed to join us, and they understood the need for a discussion like this, and they basically understood my invitation to them, uh, so or understood the context rather of my invitation, so they agreed to join the panel. I'm hoping for a very fruitful exchange today, which of course will involve you, the audience. All right. I'd like to thank also the chair of the department, Dr. Jovito Carino, the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, Dr. Malu Madruño, and everybody who is here today. Hopefully, something good will come out of this um, conversation. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to read my presentation, or my sharing rather, today. We are basically tasked to talk about the possibility of a shared excellence framework for philosophy. And we invited representatives from various universities, so that we will have a holistic and collective discussion. This is something that not only one department should be doing. I believe that it's something that a collectivity of different departments in academics, not only from philosophy but from other disciplines as well, should be involved in this endeavor. And you will perhaps see the importance later on. But my task today is to give you the context of why we are doing this panel, this discussion. And so I entitled my sharing, uh, uh, I entitled it towards a shared excellence framework for philosophy. So that's the question that we will have to ask and hopefully answer today. But first, a note on self-criticism and self-understanding. Now, here are my talking points. I have basically around 9 or 10 pages, but I'm I think allowed to talk for uh, 10 minutes. So I'll do my best. Just let me know, floor, if I'm already going beyond my time. So here are my talking points. Number one, the context of the panel discussion, a shared. So let's ask the question: is it necessary to have a shared excellence framework for philosophy? What is an excellence framework in the first place? And is it necessary? Second, the total quality management regime, or the TQM. I'm going to talk about concepts like rituals of verification, counterfeit reflexivity, and there's a third one which I failed to mention in that item. But uh, and the third talking point is it is worrisome that we are lagging behind our worry about TQM. Hopefully, that will become clear later. Fourth talking point: the regionalism of philosophy departments in the Philippines, which may be true for other disciplines as well. Um, so I'm going to read my short paper, and you could just read with me the context of the panel discussion. I first would like to provide the context for why we organized this panel discussion. Right off the bat, I must say that the 10th year celebration of the USC Department of Philosophy is also an opportunity for critical self criticism and self understanding. We might have the youngest philosophy department in the country, but philosophy as a discipline has been in existence in the University of Santo Tomas for over 500 years already. As such, it is indeed a moment to declare what the department stands for against the backdrop of the current state of academia, to publicly state the values that we members of the USC Department of Philosophy abide by, and what are the causes that we believe are worth fighting for. I do think, however, that our department is also analogously comparable to other philosophy departments, inasmuch as we share the same experiences, we believe in the same values, and fight for the same causes. And that's why we have with us today, representatives from various institutions all over the country. I also think that we share these with other disciplines, inasmuch as our academic lives are prefigured by forces that I dare say detrimental to the vocation we have chosen. Hence, this panel discussion will speak not only about what is going on in philosophy, as it is about what is actually going on in academia today. The situation is bleak, and I am already inhibiting myself when I say that. When our department head, Dr. Jovito Carino, and I conceived the idea of a shared framework, we did not mean anything particularly technical about it. Although the idea of an excellence framework is based on the British system of impact evaluation of educational institutions, which is the basis for performance rankings in British schools. You could just check the website. We instead understand a shared excellence framework to be the byproduct of the collective effort of departments of philosophy in the Philippines to debate and agree on what excellent teaching and research should be in philosophy. To date, all we have is what the Philippine Commission on Higher Education mandates via the Technical Panel in Philosophy that is tasked to draft memorandum orders for Center of Excellence and Center of Development applications, and to revise the philosophy curricula. Aside from this, there is really no public debate on the matter of excellence framework, let alone serious conversation among us practitioners of professional philosophy about the matter, as if it does not matter at all. CHED also fails to effectively engage public conversation, and their deliberations are usually insulated or done after the fact. As a result, since there is no public awareness and sustained discussion, we just rely on whatever is mandated by CHED, which university administrators readily accept and ardently implement. These administrators consider as inviolable rule of law documents such as uh, CMO 46 series of 2012, or otherwise known as the policy standard to enhance quality assurance in Philippine higher education through an outcomes based and typology based QA. The keyword there is quality assurance, or QA. While many in academia consider this policy statement as heaven sent, as if drafted by the gods and goddesses of quality assurance, to me, it is a damagingly reductive ideology of accountability enacted into law. This ideology breeds a kind of counterfeit reflexivity, which I will explain later on. A counterfeit like reflexivity that is blindly uh, enamored of rituals of verification, bibliometrics, rankings, etc., so accreditation, etc. Now, the second talking point, the total management, the total quality management regime, TQM regime. The purpose then of our panel discussion is to initiate the debate, or at least to brainstorm. So that's what I'm envisioning today, a kind of brainstorming of sorts, so that as practitioners of professional philosophy, we may talk about the pitfalls of the regime of total quality management in education. Yes, I am referring to the bad one, the one we always complain about privately in our small messenger groups, but fail to deliberate on in a sustained manner. I believe that it is high time that we elevate our discussion to a more critical stage by critically engaging with the problems that TQM poses on the discipline of philosophy or education in general. We may pave the way for a collective praxis that will result in an alternative conception of teaching and research in philosophy beyond the regime of TQM. Not necessarily alternative, because the point is really to go back to the original meaning of teaching and research in philosophy. So it's an alternative only to the extent that it's an alternative to total quality management. Our hope is that we would be able to offer a collective stand on the matter, said contra. On the contrary, this is what we think philosophy should be. So it is in this sense that shared is used. In the second Critique conference held in February, last February 2021, with the theme From Wisdom Special Workshop to Factories of Knowledge, the Place of University in Culture and Society, I read a paper which I gave the title, When Do We Hit the Brakes? Speed and Its Impact on Learning. Preliminary Notes on a Dromology of Education. In my talk, I discuss, among others, three interrelated concepts, namely rituals of verification, metric fixation, and counterfeit reflexivity, which I deem to be the main destructive features of the TQM regime. So please allow me to rehearse once again what I read in the talk. So I'm actually repeating what I said or what I read during that talk. Let me begin by the idea of the rituals of verification. The rituals of verification manifest as a generalized logic of accountability, which comes into practice in two ways. First is what is generally referred to as quality assurance, which in the industrial setting is a method used to prevent manufacturing defects, as well as a way of ensuring utmost customer satisfaction. This practice has been reterritorialized in higher education in the form of quality assessment of educational practices, or what some educational theorists would loosely call outcome accreditation. Accreditation, uh, a term which we are all familiar with already, and probably we have really gotten sick and tired of it. Second, a generalized logic of accountability is also practiced in academic research in the form of bibliometrics, um, and similar schemes. Bibliometrics is, of course, practiced in library, previously practiced in library in information science to determine statistical data based on the quantity of citations that academic journals generate. Bibliometric data are used by libraries to decide which journals to purchase or to subscribe to. But in the past few decades, the same method has been used by university administrators and funding bodies to determine the quality of the research outputs of faculty researchers. In other words, it became a quick fix, no? A quick fix. Should we grant that academic money for his or her research? The quick fix is to look at the citations, but not necessarily the citations. What they look at are the names of the journals where that academic published his or her research outputs. Um, and so therefore the term impact factor determines, the idea of impact factor determines who will get the grant and who will not. In other words, what librarians call journal impact factor has been repurposed in the academic world as a measurement of the quality of research. This obsession with quality assurance in bibliometrics boils down to what Jerry Muller calls metric fixation. In his book, The Tyranny of Metrics, published in 2018, Mueller, Mueller lays down three characteristics of metric fixation. First, metric fixation is the belief that it is possible and desirable to replace judgment acquired by personal experience and talent with numerical indicators of comparative performance based upon standardized data or metrics. It is also the belief that making such metrics public or transparent assures that institutions are actually carrying out their purposes, accountability. We're going to refer to that as accountability. And thirdly, metric fixation is the belief that the best way to motivate people within these organizations is by attaching rewards and penalties to their measured performance. Rewards that are either monetary, pay for performance, or reputational, okay, institutional rankings. Uh, Institutional fixation over metrics, according to Mueller, could result in the gaming of figures. Linalaro. Right? Gaming of figures. I think we are all familiar with this. That is to say, the manipulation of the figures in order to create the illusion that targets are achieved or surpassed, like body counts, citations, impact factor, and so on. To quote Mueller at length, he says gaming the metrics occurs in every realm, in policing, in primary, secondary, and higher education, in medicine, in nonprofit organizations, and of course in business. And gaming is only one class of problems that inevitably arise when using performance metrics as the basis of reward or sanction. There are things that can be measured. There are things that are worth measuring. But what can be measured is not always what is worth measuring. What gets measured may have no relationship to what we really want to know. The costs of measuring may be greater than the benefits. That is true. No? How much do we spend for our accreditations and assessments? The things that get measured may draw effort away from things we really care about. How much, how many, uh, have you ever wondered that you spend more time drafting your syllabi or course plans than actually reading for your courses and engaging with your students? That you spend more time attending repetitive, seminars on how to draft an OBE syllabus than actually teaching. And measurement may provide us with distorted knowledge, knowledge that seems solid but is actually deceptive. and corruptive. And that boils down to the next idea that I'm going to mention, the idea of counterfeit reflexivity. No, that leads us to the idea of counterfeit reflexivity. So gaming leads to counterfeit reflexivity. So another dimension to the phenomenon of metric fixation and its eventual gaming is what Louis Morley in her book, in Quality and Power in Higher Education. Uh, she refers to it as counterfeit reflexivity. This kind of reflexivity describes how the language of external quality assessors forces academics to not only present themselves in a semantics alien to their respective disciplines, but also to lie about the status of their academic credentials. More Do I have to elaborate on that, or do you know this for a fact? Morley maintains, I quote, for quality assurance, reflexivity is prescribed and circumscribed by external agents. It allows very little theoretical departure or development. It can be another example of capillary power, with academics policing themselves and others in the service of quality assurance. This can result in an alienation that leads to disaffection, caught between the state, employers, the market, industry, students, and consumers, and the wider economic concepts of globalization, employability, international competitiveness, universities and academics in Britain. She's talking about the UK experience, are struggling with a hybrid identity that can be demoralizing and confusing. And of course, uh, Rowie later on will probably share with us more about the UK experience. The next talking point. It is worrisome that we are lagging behind our worry about TQM. Worrying about the dangers of the TQM regime is not new. As a matter of fact, one of the first criticisms of this regime came from a philosopher, the late Bill Readings, in his 1996 book called The University in Ruins. Readings complained in his book that contemporary universities have relinquished faith in professors and have instead allowed administrators to take center stage. Universities have become transnational bureaucratic corporations, which are, I quote, tied to transnational instances of governments such as the European Union. End of quote. Of course, for us here in Southeast Asia, the ASEAN. More recently, similar arguments can be found in the books of Stefan Collini, namely What Are Universities For, published in 2012, and Speaking of Universities, published in 2017. Collini, for his part, laments that this culture of audit is damaging in as much as it diverts our attention from the real purpose of our academic specializations to a preoccupation with an artificial kind of accountability. In other words, it forces us to shift our attention from the value of our work to quantitative value, where there is no need to quantify. There's no need to quantify. We succumb to the corrupted practice of gaming, that is, of inventing numbers. Uh, this quotation from Collini, the following quotation summarizes this point. The value of playing Beethoven's piano sonatas is attested by the way it helps to make us better typists. I find that funny. A logic from which impact in its currently required form is not wholly exempt. For similar reasons, we are led to connive in the fiction that an auditable paper trail is evidence of the presence of the relevant form of quality. Uh, in 2014 and 2015, respectively, the Forum of the Internationalization of Science and Humanities, a forum sponsored by the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, convened two successive conferences attended by the International Advisory Board of the Alexander von Humboldt and other top scientists and researchers from various fields. In 2014, in the 2014 forum, the bold called for a possible paradigm shift in identifying academic excellence that avoids the pitfalls of statistics-based measurements, resulting in the proceedings called Beyond Bibliometrics, identifying the best. In the following year, 2015, the same group convened a follow-up conference where they discussed and made resolutions for the paradigm shift they discussed a year earlier. In the proceedings identifying the best theory, methods, and practice, they problematized the phenomenon of bibliometrics and how the practice stifles instead of encourages research productivity. They also offer best practices in identifying qualitative impact as opposed to quantitative impact. Given these initiatives from top international academics, both from the sciences and the humanities, and no other than the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, there is a clear indication that the rest of the world have moved on from the ideology of bibliometrics. Top international academics have publicly declared their dissatisfaction and deep discomfort with the system. Yet here in the Philippines or perhaps here in Southeast Asia, we seem to have we seem to be so desperate in implementing what many scientists and academic institutions have already identified as a threat to the healthy
But
proliferation
we
of
don't have
knowledge.
cotton balls.
It is also worthwhile to mention here the existence of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA for short, which I am a proud signatory of DORA. DORA is a global initiative by editors and publishers of scholarly journals who met at the annual meeting of the American Society for Cell Biology in 2012. So these are DORA was initiated by scientists primarily. The group identified the pressing need to improve the ways in which the output of scientific research is evaluated by funding agencies, academic institutions, and other parties. Perhaps it is enough to mention here the three recommendations of DORA, and you may just read the complete declaration in the website, and you may choose to sign the initiative if you agree with the cause. So here are the three recommendations. First, according to Dora, there's the need to eliminate the use of journal-based metrics, such as journal impact factors, in funding, appointment, and promotion considerations. Second, the need to assess research on its own merits rather than on the basis of the journal in which the research is published. And third, the need to capitalize on the opportunities provided by online publication, such as relaxing unnecessary limits on the number of words, figures, and references in articles, and exploring new indicators of significance and impact. In relation to DORA, very recently, the European Research Council, founded by the European Commission, and is the main funding body for scientific and technological research in the European Union, has made an important and radical change in their selection policies. The Council has banned even the very mention of impact factor in research funding bids. So that's a very radical move on the part of the ERC. So you can read on this by visiting these websites or these links. Now, since it seems that we are all fond of logos, right? Allow me to show you the logos of institutions that support DORA. And you might be surprised which institutions are supporting DORA, right? This is a preview. I'm happy to see their PLOS. Okay, you know PLOS. PLOS pala believes in DORA. That's saying a lot. My plea to you is that once and for all, we have to publicly recognize the elephant in the room and to ask the question, If the TQM regime has already been identified by academics and academic institutions, this once, right, as counterintuitive to the goals of real education, then why do we keep on endorsing TQM? More to the point, if not the academe, then who is or which system is pulling the strings? We need not look far, really. The answer is so glaring that it is found in the company logos printed in our letterheads and tarpaulins. Not before long, because of the number of logos on our letterheads, there will be no space to write our letters anymore. 10 years from now, or maybe sooner, we will look back and we will realize that we have given up real societal impact for impact factor and have spent more hours attending repetitive seminars on constructing OBE course plans than actually reading for and teaching in our classes. That we have unwittingly chosen appearance over substance. So, my last talking point is about what I refer to as the regionalism of philosophy department. So, in a way, this is an appeal to um, uh, my colleagues from all over the country. There is an underlying regionalism of philosophy in the Philippines. So, the regionalism of philosophy departments in the Philippines, which may be also true for other disciplines. So my appeal is that if we are going to come up with a shared excellence framework, an alternative to the TQM regime, then it has to become a kind of collective praxis. But in all honesty, I believe that such collective praxis is only possible when we first overcome our very own philosophic regionalism. I am referring to the fact that while we have strong and competitive departments of philosophy, we still brand ourselves as products of UST, Ateneo, LaSalle, UP, USC, ADU, and so on, as opposed to treating each other as earnest scholars in specific fields. I cringe painfully whenever I hear someone say, this philosophy comes from Sampaloc, this one comes from Katipunan, and that one comes from TAF. It's very sad. We are all guilty of this regionalism. I have always found this behavior very frustrating because I think that it nips the development of philosophizing in the Philippines in the bud. Because we rely on the brand of our schools, not our scholarship, we fail to read and appreciate and hence criticize each other's works or ideas. I believe that this is the reason why we are still wondering whether Filipino philosophy exists or not. It is because we have yet to overcome our destructive philosophic regionalism, and we have yet to develop a culture of writing, reading, debating. Only when we have abandoned this regionalism are we able to do greater things as Filipino philosophers. And I hope that we would be able to correct this bad behavior together, as it contributes profoundly to the problems we are facing. And we can, like I said, the collective praxis that we are all hoping for would not become possible or would not happen if we could not overcome this destructive philosophical regionalism first. So I'll stop there. I don't know if I went beyond my 10 minutes. I apologize if I went beyond my time, but hopefully that gave you the context of the exchange today. So I'll stop talking now and let's listen to the other presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bolaños. And so we move on to our next speaker. Maybe call on Dr. Jacqueline Cleovas. The floor is
Hi.
yours, Doc. Hello.
Hi, good morning. I take it you can hear me. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Alberta, for the introduction earlier.
Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning. Hi, Paolo. I'm very grateful to Dr. Paolo Bolaños and for inviting me to this conversation, which I think is very important and necessary for all of us in the philosophy community in the Philippines. And I also thank Dr. Bolaños and Dr. Carino for initiating this conversation. So there. I'm also very much looking forward to hear the rest of the panelists offer their thoughts on this topic. Okay, so I'm going to begin. I'm not going to show a PowerPoint, but I'm going to read from my notes, and hopefully you can think along with me there. So I want to begin by asking two questions, and it's going to be so typical of philosophers to ask questions, right? But I think these are questions that are very important. The first question is, what do we want the shared excellence framework for? What is the goal of this effort to begin to have something like a shared excellence framework? And in connection with that, and I'm very glad that Dr. Bolaños Paolo has already outlined the problems with the TQM, and I can just refer to TQM as a shortcut for many things that we find problematic connected to metrics, accreditation, rankings, and so on. Because the other question that I'm interested in, and it's actually the question that I will talk about more, is why are we skeptical about the TQM and the technical language of ISO? Why is that? What's the point of the skepticism? What is it oriented towards? And I think it's very important to be very clear about what the goal is, what the goal of the skepticism is, what the goal of this critique is, and also to clarify, and this is what I will begin with, about what isn't the goal of this criticism or skepticism. Because I think there are two things that's very important to set aside. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, in the criticism of TQM and quality assurance and metrics and so on, certain things get baked in that are unexamined presuppositions that we need to set aside. So first, I think that our skepticism about quality assurance and metrics should not be guided by a nostalgia for the so-called good old days. The so-called good old days when there was no rankings, there was no quality assurance, there was no metrics, there was nothing of the sort, and supposedly philosophy was just about life. I have learned something very important about nostalgia from the sociologist and MacArthur Fellow Tracy Macmillan Cottom. Incidentally, Dr. Cottom writes about for-profit approaches in higher ed, and she has very interesting, being a sociologist, she has very interesting analysis of what happens when we have this great interest in philosophy that's or in education that's financialized and is spoken about in a capitalist framework, basically. But I'm going to talk about Dr. Cottom's point about nostalgia. She says that it's very important to recognize who were excluded during the times we're tempted, during those times, during those periods that elicit nostalgia from some or maybe all of us, right? 20 or more years ago, I think conversations about excellence in philosophy or how we move forward together as a philosophy community, 20 or more years ago, this would have excluded a lot of people. Our panel today is composed by men and women, but it actually is very common in philosophy departments to have more men and for panels to have more male members. And of course, it's not just exclusion on the basis of gender. We're also familiar the regionalism that Paulo spoke about. There are also exclusions based on geographic location and social class. And these are things that are kind of baked into certain problems that we have. So I think it's very important to say that as we criticize the quality assurance framework and how it's become tyrannical, it's important also not to make this about nostalgia for so-called good old days. Second, I think it's also important to point out, and I think probably this is very obvious for all, but I think it's also worth noticing that the criticism of the quality assurance framework should not be out of evasion of external review or mechanism for accountability, or even the presupposition that any attempt at measuring excellence is wrong-headed or misguided. I think it's kind of easy to show that any simple-minded idea that any measure of excellence or wrong-headed, or any measure of excellence is wrong-headed, or any kind of external review is false is easily demonstrable. I mean, for instance, if we look at the office of the vice president, and I'm talking about Vice President Leni Robredo, we can say that her office has an ISO certification, or that it has a certain kind of COA rating. And we think that is an indicator of something important, especially compared to a group that calls its performance excellence without regard for any scientific analysis of data or rejecting any form of criticism. So I think our shared skepticism of TQM, of QA, of quality assurance, is based on the rejection of a neoliberal approach in higher ed, and especially the use of metrics for capitalistic thinking. So if we're rejecting the goal for which people use metrics, I think the rejection of the TQM framework is a rejection of what metrics are being used for, and how metrics are conceived and how they are used. And I think one problem that we have is that the metrics as they exist now give a poor capture of excellence and an inadequate barometer of whether we are hitting targets aligned with certain values. Values that have something to do with knowledge production, yes, but not just in terms of publishing in journals that have impact factor, high impact factor, or any kind of impact factor at all, but ideally towards building responsible belief formation among us and among our students, and also building inclusive knowing communities, especially in philosophy-specific context. When we want excellence, what do we want a shared excellence for? I think it's very important to notice that one important goal is to have an inclusive knowing community where we can thrive together and exchange ideas and criticize each other's ideas constructively. So if I'm right about the problem, about the poor capture of excellence, then a more ingenious approach is to carefully calibrate the way that we engage with the EQM QA framework. In other words, I propose something that doesn't amount to a wholesale rejection of metrics. And I want to outline some ways that we can go about this. I think one thing that has developed in conversations about this whole angst and this whole tendency to say, oh, we used to have a university as a different kind of ideal. It wasn't touched by these financial or worldly considerations. Unfortunately, that kind of thinking sometimes lends itself to faculty, professors, against admin and staff. And it tends to be especially against administrators, sometimes of any kind, sometimes of any demand coming from the side of administrators, and especially coming from antagonism towards people who gather data and give us information about how many students do this or what kind of outputs that we have. We need to engage with the metrics and the people who gather and process data if we are to use them in a way that will help the goals that we have. So I think I think this is an interesting point, but I'm actually more interested in this second side of not wholesale rejection of metrics. And I think it's very important to focus on the side of accountability and not the counterfeit reflexivity, of course, and not the fake accountability that we're all familiar with, but So instead of using the metrics as a blunt instrument to push us in directions where we don't want to go, I think it's very important to look at research on accountability and on the kind of things that produce the desirable form of accountability. Lerner and Tetlock summarizes a whole body of research in psychology and the human sciences about when a good type of accountability is elicited. So I will briefly go through the conditions. So according to them, the good kind of accountability is elicited by the need to respond to an audience with the following features. A, the audience's views are unknown. B, they are interested in accuracy. C, they're focused mainly on processes instead of outcomes. D, they're reasonably well informed. And E, they have legitimate reasons for inquiring into the matter at hand. So these are conditions that are sometimes met when peer review and external review are set up in a certain way. And it's kind of collegial in its manner of concern towards accuracy and sound decision making. So I think it's very important to look at the research and accountability, and there's something that we can contribute in the discussion and in the reflection on this as philosophers, and to see, look, this is the kind of accountability that works and that's helpful to us, both in promoting our goals and also in addressing certain problems that we have. Because another problem that most people have is that we are susceptible to certain pressures and interpersonal dynamics that lead to mistakes, that instead of building excellence or accountability, builds an echo chamber, promotes a certain kind of groupthink, and notoriously it hides conflict of interest and biased thinking from view. So I think that detaching certain forms of assessment and certain framework and certain kinds of ideas about quality of output, quality of the teaching and the process in which it's engaged, right, is something that we can work towards. And I want actually to focus on a concrete case that to ground this conversation and something very specific, and I think directly useful, hopefully, to us as teachers and to our students. And I'm talking about the concrete case of requiring, let's say, a thesis for BA and MA philosophy. I'm assuming the PhD programs require a thesis. So that there's this agreement on the requirement and the general parameters on how to assess submissions. And none of the idea that, for instance, that in some places, an oral exam is as good as writing a thesis. If we're interested in a certain kind of rigor and a certain kind of excellence, like a common ground of this is the output that we're interested in, but at the same time not focus too much on the output itself, but also the process. I think excellence should be grounded not only on assessing the quality of the final product, but ensuring good quality training is in place. And this is something I think we can collaborate on. And one thing that I'm interested in, and this is probably the point that I will end with, there is a book that I use when I teach research paper writing, and I found this to be very productive, both for me and both for the students. I'm going to show you the book. Hopefully it doesn't get blurred by Zoom too much. So the book is by Wendy Laura Belker, a professor of African literature at Princeton University. And I think this book is like and the book's title is Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, but it's really about academic writing. If we can develop a philosophy-specific approach that harnesses what this book does, which is basically look at the whole publication business, the impact factor business, and use that as a tool to help people who are first-generation researchers, first-generation college students, and help them navigate the way and contribute and express themselves so that their voices are heard in the greater knowing community. So I think work on something like that would be very exciting. I think I will end with that. I have gone over the 10 minutes, but yeah, thank you. And I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. And we call on Miss Ruby Azada-Palacios. Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Fleur. Thank you for your introduction earlier. And I want to begin by saying happy anniversary to our colleagues at UST and congratulations on this past month of events. And it was really exciting to listen to both Paolo and Jack speak before me. And I think that I'm beginning to see a kind of convergence of ideas. And I hope that I'm still able to contribute to the discussion after Paolo and Jack's excellent overviews of and points for reflection. Like Jack, I begin with a question. And the question that motivated my own thinking as I was preparing for today was, well, what does it mean to be excellent? What does it mean to be excellent? And in my thinking, I kept on going back to three sources of, I would suppose, wisdom that I kept going back to in trying to weigh this question in my mind. And the first source of wisdom is something that I've grown up with. Today, as some of you probably know, is the feast day of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who is the patron saint of, well, of all Ignatian institutions, such as the one that I belong to. And it struck me as something that was probably providential, because if there is somebody who has written a lot about excellence, and who's probably my own wellspring of thinking about excellence, it's his work. And in the retreat that Saint Ignatius wrote, he began by writing what he would call the first principle and foundation. And I will read it for the benefit of those of you unfamiliar with it. And I want to apologize for his androcentric language, which of course was reflective of the time that he lived. So, the first principle and foundation. Man is created to praise, reverence, and serve God our Lord, and by this means to save his soul. And the other things on the face of the earth are created for man, that they may help him in attaining the end for which he is created. From this it follows that man is to use them insofar as they help him towards his end, and he ought to rid himself of them insofar as they hinder him. For this it is necessary to make ourselves indifferent to all created things, in all that is allowed to the choice of our free will and is not prohibited to it. So that on our part, we want not health rather than sickness, not riches rather than poverty, not honor rather than dishonor, not a long rather than a short life, and so in all the rest, desiring and choosing only what is most conducive for us to the end for which we are created. And so this whole principle of indifference that Saint Ignatius was known for, this idea that when we are trying to make a choice, for example, in life, and we're trying to choose between two options, what guides us in our choosing is whether or not which of these two options direct us towards our ultimate end, right? Our ultimate goal, which of course for Saint Ignatius is union with God. Okay. I'll move on to my second source of wisdom that I want to draw from, and this comes from well, I suppose from friends who are active in the socialist movement, and whenever we have conversations about, what is the worth of doing a particular venture, one of the questions that they always respond with is, well, for whom and with whom, right? Para kanino at para saan, at sino ang kasama natin, right? So I think for our context, the question then is, para kanino ba tayo namimilosopiya? Okay, who is it that we are doing this work for? This work of teaching, this work of researching, this work of conversation. And again, it boils down to the question, what is it for? And I think beginning with these two sources of wisdom, Saint Ignatius and the socialist movement, I think that what these two sources of wisdom have in common is that they both encourage us to really ask a more fundamental question, which is, why are we doing what we are doing? And of course, all of us may have certain individual reasons for doing what we are doing. I simply love reading philosophy or what have you. But I think that if we are going to start talking about a kind of shared framework, then maybe a reflection on the shared framework ought to begin with a reflection on what it is that we are seeking to achieve. What is it that motivates us? Because only then, I think, does it make sense to answer the question, how do we do that excellently? Once it becomes clear para saan at para kanino ba tayo namimilosopiya, then we have a lens to really look at what it is that we're doing well, what is it that we're not doing well, and how we can improve. Because if we don't begin by clarifying that to ourselves, I think we will always be chasing after other people's definition of success or glory. And more specifically, we may be perpetuating a certain coloniality, which brings me to my third source of thinking, which comes from my own research, which is the decoloniality movement. And when I've given over the past few weeks, well, months rather, lectures and seminars about decoloniality, and when trying to help the people that I'm engaging with navigate the literature about decoloniality, because it has so many buzzwords now, what I like to emphasize is that the decoloniality movement is primarily a movement for justice, right? It's primarily a movement for greater justice, specifically in the context of the history of colonial injustice and power asymmetries that have been brought about by the history of colonialism, the global history of colonialism. And so one of the things that many of the Latin American decolonial thinkers, for example, such as Walter Mignolo and Anibal Quijano and so forth, talk about is how to de-link the production of knowledge from Eurocentrism and from epistemic Eurocentrism. And I think that this can be another source of thinking, that as we are trying to reflect on the question of bakit ba tayo namimilosopiya, to also be conscious and aware of how our own definitions of what makes good philosophy, or why we ought to philosophize, or how we ought to philosophize, might have already been shaped and influenced by a certain coloniality that we might not be even fully aware of. And by coloniality, I don't just mean like in terms of foreign influence, but I mean it, I suppose, in the sense that that Dr. Cleofas meant it earlier, that we may not be conscious of who has been excluded historically from the conversations. And that includes us as well. One of the, I suppose, I think tasks ahead for us as philosophers and of people who are training the next generation of philosophers is to encourage ourselves and our students to find our voice in this global conversation of philosophy. Not to think that we need to emulate the way that others do philosophy, but really to find a way of doing philosophy that is rooted in our own context and rooted in our own concerns and rooted in what it is that we want to achieve. Okay. Now, those then are the three sources of wisdom that I wanted to bring into today's conversation, and I want to move from that to one model to critically reflect on. As mentioned by Dr. Bolaños, the idea of excellence frameworks was pioneered in the United Kingdom, okay, which is where I'm currently based. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning here. The Research Excellence Framework, okay, or the REF as it is called here, continues to be, honestly, this pervasive cloud that hangs over all academics here. And as Dr. Bolaños hinted at earlier, the reason for the development of the REF was really because of a desire for greater accountability. And you might therefore say, the reverse side of it, a greater governmentality, but owing to a desire for greater accountability because of public funding, because a lot of research here is publicly funded. Now, although certain aspects of performance-based funding systems have been emulated by other countries around Europe, I think it's also important to note that aspects of the framework have also been resoundingly criticized. I will not repeat those criticisms here. Dr. Bolaños has referred to some of this. But I will say more anecdotally that I have seen colleagues here in England break down in tears as they remember a kind of academic ethos that they feel has been lost as the ref has been implemented. Which leads us then to the question, well, what now? Okay, how can we look forward from this and plan for the future? And I will go back to another source of wisdom from my youth. In Father Roque Ferriolsa's book, Pambungad sa Metapisica, he has a metaphor which he calls lambat ng meron. Okay, so he invites his readers to imagine a fishing net laying out on a seashore. And he tells us that abstractions, conceptual abstractions, are like this fishing net. Okay, they try to cover the area of the sand, but there's always something that cannot be captured. And I think that as we move forward in our teaching and practice, and as we reflect on these questions of excellence, it might be helpful to always bear in mind this metaphor that, as Jack has mentioned earlier, there are some ways that the fishing net, the abstraction of metrics can help us to reflect on what it is that we are doing. But it's also important to be conscious of what it does not capture. And perhaps as philosophers, one thing that we can contribute to this wider conversation is to try to articulate what is not captured and to try to give our colleagues across the disciplines a kind of language to help think about what those things that are of value that are not captured by these metrics. Thank you. I look forward to the rest of the conversation with our colleagues.
Thank you very much. And at this juncture, with the citation of Ignatius of Loyola, the Samasians greet the Jesuits and Ateneans in the house. Happy Feast Day.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
thanks, Roy. We move on to the next speaker, who is the chair of Department of Philosophy and member of the University Research Council of Ateneo de Davao University. And so we call on Dr. Vida Mia Valverde. Dr. Vida, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for happy feast day. So a bright and it's a bright Saturday morning here. Congratulations on the 10th anniversary of the ST Department of Philosophy, and thank you to Dr. Paolo Bolaños for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Admittedly, TQM, or Total Quality Management, has not been in our consciousness, especially as we were scrambling to pandemic-proof ourselves with courseware development and ensuring that our students would continue their education. I guess one principle of TQM that stuck out like a sore thumb for me was the customer-centric principle, where the student is likened to a teacher's customer. This was especially highlighted to us when just recently, our very entitled students assume that when they do not get it, it's the fault of their teacher. And so they go on and try to sue their teacher. But I will not dwell on that. Let me just give you the Ateneo de Davao experience. When we went on lockdown in March 2020, the Ateneo de Davao mustered all its guts and resources and went immediately fully online by April, the first in the country to do so. So we were able to pull things together with the single-minded and visionary leadership of our university president, Father Joel Tabora of the Society of Jesus. Yes, obstacles, conflicts, anxieties were rife, but we made it. We more than made it. By May 2020, the University Research Council ran a comprehensive university-wide survey on the dispositions and use of the online learning platform. What was interesting was that even as we were hitting all the metrics of content, pedagogy, efficiency, technical skill, and platform, dispositions of students and faculty did not seem to be getting the same high ratings as our hard metrics. So there was still this something else and something more that needed to be addressed. Now, let me give you a snapshot of the Ateneo de Davao Department of Philosophy. Currently, we offer AB and MA programs. We have 10 full-time faculty members, 2 females, 8 males, and 4 part-time faculty members, 2 females, 2 males. The department has 4 PhDs. We have Dr. Renante Pilapil, who is the Dean of our School of Arts and Sciences, very prolific author, Dr. Christopher Ryan Mabolok, who was awarded the Public Intellectual Prize by the PAP last year. Dr. Peter Paul Elicor, who completed his PhD studies, magna cum laude, with you, with UST, last year. Hi po. And, and myself. Our faculty members have different competencies and in good position publications-wise. A challenge we have is to cascade these competencies into our core courses so that we have a distinct identity. It has been remarked that we have the talent, but perhaps we just don't have the desire. Now, this semester, we currently have 58 classes in the undergrad and 2 classes in the grad school. Philosophy faculty members hold crucial administrative positions in the university. The Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, the Assistant Dean of Humanities and Letters are from philosophy. So are the University Registrar and Human Resources Director. Our, let's say, premier courseware and instructional designer is from philosophy. I hold a position in the University Research Council. And well, our university president holds a PhD in philosophy, and his executive vice president is from philosophy as well. So I give this because I like to think that our university is run with a little bit more wisdom, or at the very least with this overarching sense of the more, the greater good and the intangible. The university is guided by a strategic plan inspired by the Jesuit Universal Apostolic Preferences with 6 expressed goals. The second goal talks about the cultivation of humane humanity. So this is where philosophy would come in. This goal would include cultivation of insight into humanity through liberal arts. As to the CHED CMO 46 2012, maligned though it may be, we only took it as a minimum standard and added our own Ateneo Excellence Standards with the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm, or IPP, of always taking into consideration context, experience, reflection that leads to action, and evaluation. Though outcomes-based education does not exactly sit well with philosophy, somehow it becomes transformed and still, you know, philosophically meaningful with the IPP. So going back to my earlier assertion that there was still something else and something more that needed to be addressed, I'd like to share this experience of our department when we shifted to online classes. So we have this bridging philosophy subject for those entering into college from non-Ateneo senior high schools, the Philo 1000. It is a well-designed courseware that hits the metrics of substance, competencies developed, efficiency and suitability to our LMS. In fact, we've received interest for collaboration from an Asia Pacific Jesuit university for using this courseware. The program will be collaborative online international learning. So it's that good and interesting, apparently. But I was really confounded by the feedback I was getting from students. Most of them were flunking. Sure, they were not doing what was expected of them. We know there's a dearth now of reading capacity and or interest. Of course, we have the pandemic to contend with. But the students were, in a way, refusing to or could not learn because they were not being given input by a human they could personally connect or instantly interact with. We contend that they have to learn to do independent learning, but the fact remains that they do not learn and ultimately fail the subject. I share this because it highlights the two senses of the word accountability, as in can be counted and being responsible for. We were making it in the first sense, but not quite making it in the second. So now we are learning and making tweaks and will certainly be more responsible and responsive to our students' learning. But we are building on the countable to be more accountable and vice versa. So, this good kind of accountability that Doc Jack was talking about earlier. Context is very integral to how we are as a philosophy department in Mindanao. I'm not being regionalistic here, but this is like our context. We can contribute to the dialogue on peace, the environment, poverty, and justice. Two things we can respond to. Locally, we have the Mindanao problem. Globally, there is climate change. So it is not enough that we focus on the philosopher and see how he or she solves the problem. We have tools at our disposal: interdisciplinary, intradisciplinary, transdisciplinary. Um, we have the imperative to bridge, let's say, science to society, Philippines, especially Mindanao, to the world. We as philosophers must work with scientists and other stakeholders for a truly global and holistic perspective. Well, I think our culture here at the Ateneo de Davao does not yet have that dog eat dog drive for metrics. Sure, we are happy when we see our name somewhere at or near the top or in a respectable position of whatever university ranking list. Those of us who get published in a respectable journal are only given monetary incentive once a year, regardless of the number of times we get published in a year, even if it's Scopus, whatever. We do not yet have an official stand on open access publications, but an informal survey has yielded careful stances from what is important is the quality that only top tier journals can provide for, to how do we get income? Or perhaps we can do blended. The printed copies are paid for, the ones online are free. I may sound idealistic, but our excellence framework for now is still rooted in being Ignatian and Mindanaoan. All the other metrics get hit when we first fulfill such identity. So good morning, everyone, and happy feast day to Ateneans, to Ignatians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vida. And so we move on to our next speaker, and I call on now Dr. Ruby of USC.
Good morning, Floor.
Good morning.
So thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this discussion. So I received the 4 talking points now as mentioned in the email. So the first talking point is whether a shared excellence framework for philosophic teaching and research possible. And somehow my discussion now focuses on this first talking point. Reiterating also what was actually pointed out by Ruby, that when we talk about this shared excellence framework, personally I believe that it is really possible. But I at the same time believe that there is a need to ascertain why in the first place we teach and do research in philosophy, or generally why we philosophize. So because the moment we know the why, then maybe if indeed time is to come that we're going to make some matrix, then this could be a very good basis. So basically, I focus on that because when we talk about philosophy, as it was also mentioned by Professor Bolaños, now, that we can somehow say philosophy in the Philippines is as old as UST. Now, when UST celebrated their quadricentennial anniversary, it was mentioned that there were two programs in the university that celebrated with that anniversary. It was philosophy and theology. But what is the implication of this thing when I say philosophy is as old as UST? Now, it would say that philosophy in the Philippines is, in the first place, academic in nature. And so this could be the reason why Emerita Quito in the first place said that philosophy in the Philippines is a product of a colonial accident. And so being a product of this colonial accident, coming also from Demeterio, that this very concept of philosophy now could be embodying some radical distortions. And so this is the reason why I am somehow thinking of looking back now or going back. What really is the purpose of philosophy? Okay. So this year also, we are celebrating 500 years of Christianity now. And I somehow believe that this discussion about authentic, now the term authentic Filipino philosophy, much less a Filipino identity, has not yet been forged. So moving forward, I somehow believe that there is a need to divert the direction of philosophy from the academe to the life world of the people. So what really is this philosophy? The word philosophia itself is telling us that philosophy is something which, first of all, determines the existence of the Greek world, now, according to Martin Heidegger. Not only that, philosophia now also determines the innermost basic feature of our Western European history. Thus, the statement that says philosophy is in its nature Greek says nothing more than that the West and Europe, and only these are in the innermost course of their history, originally philosophical. This is the claim of Martin Heidegger. Now, which roughly now non-Western philosophers would somehow disagree. Now, in fact, Dr. Ko made mention of the three types now, or three types of philosophizing now. So representing the three great civilizations now: the Greek civilization, the Indian civilization, and then the Chinese civilization. But I would somehow say that philosophy existence as a product of an exigency. Now, in other words, before there was philosophy, now in Greece, there were first the myths now of Hesiod as well as Homer. So everywhere, now it was said, and at all times, we humans have wondered at our own existence and our place in the scheme of things. So we have asked, in curiosity and amazement, what's it all about? How are we to understand this life of ours? So on and so forth. Okay. So early answers to that questions now universally take the form of stories, usually stories involving gods. And we call these stories myths. And these stories are told and retold, taught to children as the plain facts, gaining authority by their age, by repetition, and by the apparent fact that within a given culture, virtually everyone accepts them. So these myths shape a tradition, and traditions shape lives. We can say, therefore, that there are two main functions of myth. The first is to answer the sort of awkward questions that children ask, such as who made the world, how will it end, who was the first man, so on and so forth. And the second function of myth is to justify an existing social system and account for traditional rights and customs. or the sociological function according to Campbell. But again, as I've said, now philosophy in the first place was a response to an urgent need in their time, the need to correct how the universe was understood from the perspective of mythology. So early Greeks began to ask the question, why should we believe these stories? How do we know they are true? So at that time, there were actually two approaches, now alternative approaches now that crop up in answering these questions. One was historia or history, and the second one was philosophia or philosophy. So when people try to give good reasons for believing these myths, they have begun to do philosophy. So philosophers look at myths with a critical eye, sometimes defending them and sometimes appreciating what myths try to do, but often attacking myths' claims to literal truth. So there is a tension between these stories and philosophy, a tension that occasionally breaks into conflict. And this was actually experienced now by Socrates. And it was ironical because the case of Socrates now, which was actually epitomized now in the execution or his execution, the Athenians accused him of corrupting the youth because he challenged the commonly accepted views and values of ancient Athens. But even though Socrates challenged those views, his own views were deeply influenced by them. He was part of a conversation already centuries old among the Greeks about how to understand the world and our place in it. Now, so what is actually the significance now of this part of the history of philosophy in the Philippines? Okay, as we are celebrating 500 years now of Christianity in the Philippines, I could somehow say that there are some myths now that we actually how's it that we actually learn now from Christianity that continues to actually shape the way we live our life. And so maybe from philosophy, it is also a kind of an opportunity for us to revisit these myths. No, not only from actually Christianity, no, but from any other religion. But I would say Christianity because when we say Filipino, whether we like it or not, no, the term Filipino, I would say applies to the Christianized, Hispanized, lowland people and those people who are Muslims or indigenous Filipinos who adhere or adapted now to such culture or tradition. Now, that for me is the definition of what is really a Filipino. Because the Philippines, despite the presence of other religion, boasted now of it being the only Christian nation in Asia. But philosophy now is can also be now viewed now in the case of now, Confucius in China. So strictly speaking, the thinking of Confucius cannot actually be called a philosophy. Okay, but again, Confucius thrived now because of the warring time in China, and so Confucius revisited the history of China and find the golden age of China. Now, and so from that experience, he taught now his generation now the way of the gentleman. Okay, another example then now that we can actually get it. Also, how philosophy thrived or started in Japan during the Meiji period. Now, it was actually started by Fukushima Yukichi now in his civilization and enlightenment movement. Now, the case of Fukushima Yukichi, he somehow see or saw the poverty that Japan experienced during the Tokugawa period. And his travel in the West, now in Western Europe and America, saw how prosperous they were. And so Fukushima Yukichi drew on Western rational thought and theories of national progress that came from French and American sources as he translated books he had acquired from his trips abroad. So it was very clear in the mind of these philosophers that of these thinkers that they would like Japan to become like Western Europe and America. But this is also actually true in the Philippines. Now, we have the case of the, our heroes during the propaganda movement. Okay, we have Rizal and the company. Now, during um, that subject, no, during the propaganda movement. So Rizal actually and company were also very much influenced, by the philosophizing that happened in Europe. In fact, when we talk about education, now as far as Europe is concerned, now education is equal to now the project of modernity. As Giroux said, the Enlightenment's humanistic project has sought to create both a certain kind of autonomous, rational individual and to institutionalize the socializing processes and legitimating codes by which the grand narratives of progress and human development can be passed on to future generations. Now, so our heroes during the propaganda movement, now I think, were at the same time now shaped by this kind of an ideal. Now, to produce that sovereign or autonomous and agentic subject. But such actually a kind of an ideal did not happen, no, or did not push through because of American colonization, now, which emphasize on the legal system. Now, in fact, most of the definitions, now, so the definition of what is a state, what is law, they are usually taken from American jurisprudence. And so it is not somehow surprising if now the Philippines is very much driven by so much legalism or legality. Now, so somehow uh, is kind of a reflection that how is it that will serve as kind of a reflection on how are we going to, in a way, shape now philosophy in the Philippines. And so that kind of an ideal now of how should philosophy affect or influence our life. Now, if ever this excellence framework is going to materialize, then we have to think of it now of how philosophy can really now help shape now the Philippine culture, as it was mentioned also by Emeritiquito no in her essay, now ang filosofiya now bilang batayan ng pambansang kulturas. Now our culture is so messy now with the popular culture and the modern culture now influencing us together with a kind of difficult or a kind of a difficult result, then I think philosophy now has something, a role to play in that kind of clarifying. Now, because in the first place, as what Pythagoras said, philosophy, the role of philosophy is understanding. Now, and when you talk about understanding, just to add this presentation, so what does really understanding mean? So as it was actually, I think that understanding is also coming from Martin Heidegger. Yeah, just a while. Now, understanding consists in getting familiar with one's situation and grasping one's position within being. It is the ability to find ourselves, be comfortable with ourselves, and then orient ourselves. It means being at home with something. Thus, understanding is not so much a kind of knowledge, but more of knowing one's way around, guided by care. Now, so maybe the philosophy can help us in that particular direction. Now, thank you very much. I think that's all.
Thank you very much, Doc Ruby. And we move to our last speaker, Father Dennis. Hello, Padre. Are you there?
Yes, Ma'am Flor.
Good morning,
Greetings,
Pad.
northernmost part of mainland Luzon, no, which is Paris. And happy 10th anniversary to UST Department of Philosophy. Thank you, Ma'am Flor, for the introduction you gave earlier. Dean Carino and Dr. Paolo Bolaños, thank you. My appreciation for inviting me and be a part of this philosophical conversation. Ma'am Rowie, happy feast day, Dr. Vida, no, and all those uh, who are here, no, keeping a Ignatian spirituality. And my presentation is actually entitled Market-Driven Education, no? A Forgetfulness of Being. This is between seriousness and frivolity. Allow me then to read my humble contribution for this philosophical conversation. Excellence quality control, rankings, accreditations, competition, effective response to ever-changing needs and wants of corporate world, excellent services, profit, and school and students' achievements are now the commonplace in the field of education. They are the ones that educational institutions are preoccupied with. No one wants to be left behind. Otherwise, one's institution becomes least in the list of preference among customers. This reality has taken over the academia. We are all familiar and part of this realm as personalities in the academe. Every achievement that brings honor to the institution underscores the reputable standard of educational institution. The mark of excellence becomes the top notch in the choice of preference of customers. One might start to wonder if this is what truly education all about. Quality assurance in education, as Dr. Bolaños described in his article published in Inquirer.net sometime in 2019 entitled Speed and Its Impact on Education, is preoccupied with regulation of production hiccups, artificial accidents. The venerable phenomenologist Edith Stein, in his discussion of eidetic intuition, states, I quote, when we remove certain characteristics from the object known, the object will remain intact, while others, if removed, would destroy the object itself. End of the quotation. If artificial accidents are removed, the essence of a thing remains, even without nowadays market-driven characteristics. Education will still be education without compromising the need for quality. Heidegger's forgetfulness of being would make us ask the same question he asked as he militates against the regime of familiarity of being. Why is there being rather than nothing? We really feel the need to derail the contemporary understanding and practice of education as Heidegger derailed the question of being. Education is becoming more and more market-driven and therefore, as measurable in outcomes, give the utmost and promising guarantee to customers. The market-driven educational orientation rules the road of today's learning rather than being preoccupied with quality and transformative ones. Market-driven education threatens, threatens to eradicate educational ethos and egalitarian approach to education, placing it with imperatives of individual, ranking, and calculation. As such, market-driven education does not produce equity. It produces wedge or gap of inequality as institutions find themselves assessed and ranked in hierarchical order according to their expected performance as they are regulated to perform in a standardized way. Does one ever ask whether this is what truly education means? Great minds humanity has ever produced from ancient to our times were not product of such regulated, standardized culture. Some of the contemporary ones were school dropouts. The regime of total quality management is becoming like a created need. You have to be a part of it if you want to stay relevant. For example, who really needs to have a particular brand name on their clothes? But many people seem to think they really need particular brand of this or that product. I have to confess being too often guilty falling into this trap. It creates a sense of urgency of seemingly how things should be. Otherwise, one falls into the realm of the other. It is likened to a horror of religious doctrine ex ecclesia nulla salus. Outside the church, there is no salvation. No more thinking outside the box. Otherwise, one would be out of the way to excellence. As a consequence, rather than producing greater diversity and choice in education, markets actually produce greater similarity. This includes the creation of unforgiving performance culture with my conversation with teaching staff in different educational institutions in our region. Teachers are spending more time working for numbers and points than delivering pastoral care. There is also the phenomenon of competition among universities, where universities are engaged in selection and rejection practices to attract high-performing students and weed out underperforming students, as low performers risk tarnishing brand value of the school. Worth mentioning, the diaspora of most talented teachers from private institutions to SUCs or state universities, as they are offered better benefits and salaries. State universities are now even taking the lead in the quest for quality assurance, a scenario which is perhaps strange to those living in big cities like Cebu and in Metro Manila, whose private institutions have already a name of their own, whose foundation is firm. Not even the methodic doubt of Descartes can dismantle and destroy. Most talented teachers drift upward to the advantage of high-performing schools, and least talented sink downward. The cream of the crop will rise as the power of market widens the hierarchies. The market-driven education could exacerbate inequality and damage institution and individual sense of mission. I'm a witness to a school in a remote place in the north. Sorry to have this example, but a religious closed this school for it can no longer generate income. Their big universities can actually sustain the operation of this remote school as part of their extension program and mission to bring Catholic education to the peripheries. A big university in our province once opened and started to operate AB philosophy course, but after 3 years, sad to say, the operation stopped. The course has to be terminated as the enrollees of the course are not as many as like other courses. Even how we do philosophy is never spared from the clutches of market-driven culture. Prestigious and renowned universities in big cities like Metro Cebu and Metro Manila have the luxury of personnel and talents when it comes to the practice of doing philosophy. And they are known of their best practices in education. But there's another thing that we have to pay attention to: the existence of college seminaries offering philosophy, which was there long before we have brought philosophical discourse elsewhere. Whether we only have one student in the seminary, the course can be terminated as philosophical studies is constitutive part of priestly formation. There are no selection and rejection practices. We simply educate and produce something admirable even from scratch. Philosophy in the college seminary is part of the seminarian's life world. Hence, it is more than a degree. It arms the seminarian with knowledge, not only to have well-grounded understanding of his faith, but also at a principled and committed form of life. Philosophy finds its culmination in theology, where a seminarian starts to engage rationally and meaningfully his faith. Philosophy here becomes life that prepares young men to be future wholesome thinkers with a better view of the world and of himself. Here in this part of Northern Luzon, I provided a venue for the seminarians called Pagarubangan, a philosophical forum where they could engage their basic knowledge in phenomenology, hermeneutics, and Thomistic metaphysics, including their cultural mindset with prevailing contemporary philosophical trends for them to better understand themselves as children of this generation. It enables them to interact with each other within the limits of particular forms of life. philosophy is not an objective tool to obtain objective information. It is rather intended to foster intersubjective understanding. Lyceum Pari is the only school in the region that offers undergraduate and master's civil degree program in philosophy. On August 8, 2013, Lyceum Pari was granted government recognition by the Commission of Higher Education through CHED Technical Committee for Philosophy, headed by no less than Dr. Alfredo Co, to operate and offer MA in philosophy, making Lyceum Pari now the Center of Philosophical and Studies in Region 2. We educate anyone who is interested to study the course and dedicate ourselves to accompany our students in their academic journey with the end in mind to educate them in philosophy. We struggle to tailor our students' minds and hearts to also do likewise. That's what makes our institution not market but mission-driven one. The increase of students studying masters in philosophy is noteworthy, and I owe it not only to our professors' dedication to teach philosophy, but also to professors of big universities in Metro Manila who come often and share their precious knowledge and time in Pagurubangan Philosophical Forum. And I hope they can do more as heralds of great philosophical learnings and insights as possibilities like forging partnership would be set in motion. I really appreciate this initiative as it is shown in the session to redirect our own way of doing education, particularly the practice of doing philosophy. Education is life. Education is not one activity in catalog of activities in life. It is rather the activity that underlies all others. It is raison d'etre, is nothing less than life, but a truly human and humanizing. This is the heart of education, which is the education of the heart. It is then more than the question of methodology, technique, and proceedings. Placing Ricoeur's version of Socrates' dictum in a positive terms, the recounted life is life worth living. The occasional journey of each individual gradually takes place and develops in time. But this temporal dimension of education is not conditioned, as Dr. Bolaños wrote in his article, Speed and Mobility, but meaningful story in a journey. To conclude my thoughts, it would be good to remember Paul Ricoeur, where he finds healthy relationship circled between time and narrative. I quote, time is humanized to the extent of its expression in narrative. Narrative, in turn, is meaningful to the extent that it portrays a temporal experience. More than a process and a procedure, education is happening that battles for meaning. It should be a narrative that makes life simply worth living. It is indeed a journey of going back to the question of being forgotten due to the many thematic assertion. It is indeed a question of going back to the things themselves. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much, Padre. And
Welcome.
we thank our panelists for their words, and we are now fired up because the chat box is already filled with questions and exchanges are already going on. So at this point, we open the forum, and we have two options. The first option is to put your questions or comments at the chat box, or if you are in Facebook, you can type it, put it in the comment section. And the second option is to raise your hand so that you can be recognized and you will be put in the spotlight to ask your question here. So since there are already points at the chat box, I'll end. Should our speakers be put on spotlight, or anyway, when we throw the question, then if you have specific people who should answer the question, then you can cite it as well. So let's take this first one from Bjorn Ramirez. Some parts of this have already been addressed by Dr. Vida. But let's take this contribution is a layer of questions. So allow me to slice the layers. So let's take this part. Can philosophy departments influence policy making bodies in the country to cultivate an appreciation of philosophy in the different sectors of the society? I think this is addressed to our speakers, so anybody can answer. So how can we be influential to the policy making bodies?
Um, if I may, Flor.
Yes, Sir Pao.
Yes. The first, before I respond to the question, I'd like to issue an erratum, no? Because at the early part of my presentation, I mentioned that philosophy has been with UST for 500 years. That's of course wrong. It's just over 400 years. No, so just like to issue that erratum. And to respond to the question of, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but si uh, si Rad na lang, no? Ramirez, no? Uh, uh, can philosophy influence policy? I think it's yes, it's possible. No, but I think uh, that's why however, we have to go through some form of self reflection first, self criticism, and self understanding. The problem of regionalism, which I mentioned at the end of my talk, is one of the things, one of the problems within the philosophical community that we need to overcome. Uh, what it entails when we overcome that problem is that we begin to respect each other's opinion, and by respecting each other's opinions, then we begin to criticize each other, um, and that's how we build up some kind of philosophical culture, which has not happened yet, unfortunately. If you review the way, for example, intellectual history happened in Europe, in specifically in Germany and France. The intellectual history is characterized by critical philosophical exchanges and debates, and that's, I think, something that we have yet to cultivate. Um, at the end nga, naging regionalistic lang tayo. We're comfortable in Sampaloc, in Katipunan, in TAF, and so on. Parang we are insulated, no? Not unless we overcome that problem of regionalism, we cannot. I think our impact in policy making is not yet um, uh, readily achievable, right? So there's something that we need to sort out first from within our ranks para then we can impact. Kasi ang mangyayari niyan, baka someone from UST gets appointed to a position in CHED, and someone from pero nagiging lang siya, parang hindi siya yung, I don't know, I'm looking for the right words eh. Parang hindi pa, there's no public debate on it. Yung parang ito lang yung for example, in terms of curriculum revision, no? Isa, dalawa, tatlong tao lang yung the draft. So there's really no public debate on it. What kind of philosophy, basic philosophy curriculum we need. Um, in terms of the senior high school naman, yeah, of course that's our no, our sa tingin ko from the very beginning, yun naman yung wish natin when they were starting all this and coming up with courses for senior high school. We wanted to be there to to contribute to the content. Pero in the I am not sure if were really, or rather, I'm not sure if our participation was enough. But yes, it's possible to influence policy, but we need to get together. No, we need to get together. We need our minds to get together and be in one boat, so that when we try to influence policy, uh, we have a common ground. Uh, Kaya mukhang ayusin muna natin how we interact as fellow philosophers before we could really move on. So yun lang muna. I'll let the others share their thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Pao. Maybe ask our other speakers to comment.
Flor, may I also make a
Yes.
comment?
Yes,
As-
Dr. Ruby.
Yeah, basically, I really find this question very interesting. So, can philosophy, influence policy making bodies? So basically, I would say that philosophy, if you look around now, does it have an impact in our society now? So why don't we have an impact in our society? Maybe because in the first place, we do not join the conversation. We do not join in the discourse now that matters to the people. Instead of joining the discourse, we are so contented now being just in the classroom. This actually made me recall the words of former Senator Camilo Osias. Okay, he was once a Senate President of the Philippine Senate, saying that the ordinary man who thinks at all shuns or tends to shun philosophy. Now, why? He is either afraid of it or prejudiced against it. He believes that philosophy is replete with hypotheses or fantasies, generalizations or abstractions too profound or too ethereal. To be sure, philosophic dissertations indulge much too often in nebulous discussions of isms that are vague and contradictory or unsystematic and unsystematized. They create the impression that they are impractical and valueless, fit only as a pastime for those who wish to appear deep and erudite, and they have been made more unattractive by pedants. Now, this was a reaction or comment now by Camilo Sias way back the 1940. And it was also this time that he actually was telling people that philosophy in fact makes sense. It is important, most especially that we are about now to gain our independence. Now, thus, still coming from Camilo Osias, he likewise said that under the colonial rule, now there was a tendency for one side to blame the other for any shortcoming or failure. Self-governing, the people have to assume the blame. In other words, under the new order, when sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them, theirs is the responsibility for success or failure. And then he said, we must not fail. We cannot afford to fail. We must succeed. We must win to succeed. It is therefore incumbent upon us to formulate a philosophy and adopt a way of life that serves as a guide to the citizen and the nation. A philosophy that gives cohesion to individual and collective endeavor and makes life purposive and meaningful. That was 1940. Now, but what have we done as philosophers now? So that actually, because Paulo talked about then in the case of Europe, as I have said, as Heidegger said, now the history now of Europe is actually an offshoot of that continuing discussion or conversation started in the early Greek tradition. Now, in other words, philosophy, as far as Europe is concerned, seeps into the lives of the people. It is not an academic matter. In the Philippines, philosophy is an academic thing. And that, I think, is the difference. Maybe if we can change this kind now of philosophizing now within the classroom and get out, engage in public discussion, then maybe they will realize how important philosophy is, as what Tito said, as the foundation, the groundwork of the Filipino culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Ruby. And to add, put salt on the wound, when you put these aims of philosophy in our outcomes in the syllabi, they will not accept the vocabulary. So for the other points, we have here from Prince, something from Prince Gapo. It is easy to notice the contrast between the objectives and goals of education per se and philosophy of education. One only needs to attend a seminar or two to pinpoint the glaring differences. The positive nature of progress in education based on empirical evidences is different from the theoretical and abstract tone of philosophy of education. What then is the possibility of reconciling the objectives, or if I may say, the future of education and philosophy of education? Because for now, it seems like education and philosophy of education are imagining different futures. It is a manifestation of the lack of autocritique among, is it a manifestation of the lack of autocritique among educators, or the philosopher's love affair with the memories of nostalgia, as mentioned by Dr. Cleofas? Thank you for this question, Prince. We ask our speakers for your comments or responses to this.
Hi, Fleur. Can I say something first about the previous question?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah,
Go.
thanks. I just wanted to say that in response to the previous question about university departments influencing policymaking bodies about appreciating philosophy, I think maybe to be a little bit more optimistic, I think it has already been done. I mean, the fact that we are one of the few countries in the world that has philosophy in the curriculum at the basic education level, I think that's huge, and we should celebrate that. Most countries in the world do not teach philosophy at high school level, and so this is something that we should actually be proud of. There are, of course, a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity there. And then I think the second thing to note is that there are actually a lot of efforts that are already being done in terms of influencing the teaching of philosophy at the high school level. Well, our colleague here today, Dr. Mariela Bolaños, is somebody who has worked very hard for in terms of like pushing for philosophy for children, and of course there are other colleagues that who are also here that have done work in the same area. Um, a lot of the curriculum and textbooks in SHS philosophy were developed by university-based academics and philosophers as well. But I think maybe what's missing is probably, well, two things. Maybe more knowledge. I mean, the fact that this question was raised means that maybe there's not enough like information dissemination, and maybe we need to be more conscious of all of these efforts and be aware of the different efforts that are going on. But also, just to echo what Paulo said earlier, maybe we also need to collaborate, but not just with each other, but also collaborate with teacher practitioners. And when I say collaborate, I really mean it has to be a two-way discussion. It should not be simply like, university philosophers talking to, like informing high school philosophy teachers that this is what you ought to do. But it really has to be a kind of collaboration that comes from a two-way collaboration of listening and speaking and conversing with each other. And maybe just to add to that, I think we also need to be more aware of the kind of public philosophy efforts that are being done by our colleagues. And again, there are many. Dr. Jovi Miroy, for example, has spent a lot of time doing public philosophy, both on his radio show, as well as in his art, like his theater work. But again, going back to the regionalism, maybe we don't talk to maybe we don't know, talk to each other enough, and this is why we don't know about these efforts. And then sorry, but if I can just like quickly like address the new question. I think that okay, maybe I'll reflect on it first so that I don't end up wasting time just thinking. Let somebody else speak first.
Okay, how about our other speakers? Or if you still have something to say, Rowie, then it's okay.
I think Jack has something to
Okay,
contribute.
Yeah.
Dr.
Uh,
Jack?
Hi, thank you. I just continuing along something that Rowie has already said and addressing this question. I think also one way that we can engage better as members of the philosophy community is to collaborate and converse with our colleagues in other disciplines. And I think this is very important, especially in the social sciences and especially in the natural sciences also, but I think especially in the social sciences, people who work in education programs, I think the lines of communication is something that we can improve, and that addresses this question about the difference or lack of convergence. I think naman it's not that hindi talaga hiwalay. Meron namang convergence kahit papano with the goals of education and the goals of what do you call it? What's in the question? Goals of philosophy education and the goals of education. There are convergences there, but probably what needs to happen is a more organic and ongoing conversation for people working in the two separable or distinguishable domains. So I think it's also very important to refer to that point about conversing with colleagues in different disciplines. I think something that also gets in the way is sometimes the tendency to think that philosophy is the queen of the disciplines, and that we are somehow above or better or somehow more theoretical or something like that, and it kind of gets in the way of communication because of course people can be resentful about that, and it's something that we can affirm that it's very important that we learn from our colleagues in sociology, in psychology, in education, and so on.
Maybe just to add to what Jack is saying, well, two things. Aside from having these conversations, maybe we can also consider the possibility of more of us becoming interdisciplinary researchers. Of course, there will always be pure philosophy researchers, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And of course, there are opportunities for collaboration there. But I think we also have to, kind of like break open our disciplinary boundaries and really explore how we can, for example, at the university level, train our students not just in philosophy, but also train our students to be conversant in the language of other disciplines, because then and not to consider interdisciplinary research as somehow lower or like less worthy or less valuable compared to pure philosophy. And then I think in relation to that, I think I suppose maybe like dream of mine would be to see philosophers in non-philosophy departments. And like, I mean, like really like working in departments that are not philosophy, but they are philosophers, because I think that that's another possibility and another opportunity that can be explored. So in many countries right now, you see philosophers who aren't necessarily in philosophy departments. There are still those, but you see like whether these are actual centers, multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary centers, or simply philosophers who are sitting in positions that are not philosophy departments. We also have to, I think, be open to that and explore that. But of course, it goes back to, also challenging some of the CHED regulations that prevent this from happening.
Yeah, Flor.
Thanks for the responses. And I think the points do connect to the next responses of Bjorn, because being interdisciplinary might be a response to the fact that in senior high school, those who teach philosophy are not all philosophy majors. And so perhaps, as mentioned in here, there are stories of PE teachers and psychologists being assigned to teach philosophy to satisfy the lack of trained teachers. And we find that dangerous, of course, but if philosophy perhaps would take the vocabulary that goes beyond philosophy, then perhaps there would be better teaching of philosophy facing that difficulty. So yes, that's right. It's already 12:31, and I hope we're not yet hungry. And I just have to perhaps insert this last question from Facebook. Okay, so that all participants will be represented. So this is from Wilma Salas. There is difficulty in integrating philosophy in higher ed teaching because the main focus of most of the college department heads, well, who are not all philosophy majors, are directed towards the achievement of the goals or objectives of TQM as spelled out in the standards of QA. I think this is quality assurance in accordance to ISO, thus industrializing higher education and the production of knowledge as well. The idea of higher ed teaching is not really to give emphasis in the development of thinking processes of the students to enable them to philosophize in learning thinking. So what's your take on that? Probably we focus on industrialization and yeah, our work being subject to TQM, QA, and ISO, which ironically universities pay for.
I don't know if Father Dennis or Vida would like to say something. I want to say something, but sila muna if they wanted to talk.
Yeah, we recognize the regimen of the TQM. What we're trying to do is we're working around it. And as I mentioned earlier, we are operating under the IPP so that we're still able to do philosophy even if we're under this regime. And I'd also like to point out that, philosophy having authority is political, diba? For us to influence, let's say, policy both in the government or in our institution, there has to be power. Diba? That article, it's the power stupid. So how do we gain this power? Perhaps we gain this power by overcoming regionalism, by being more visible, by being more involved in community. Then we gain this power. And it's like a sense of um, if you can't lick them, join them first, and then when you get the power, you lick them. So that, and so we're able to entrench ourselves better and make our, vision realized as philosophy practitioners.
Okay. So I was reading the CMO 46 series of 2012, and in section 5 it was saying quality assurance is underscored by necessary thinking and technical and behavioral competencies in view of the reality of ASEAN community by 2015, which is no, to facilitate free flow qualified labor and to develop a system of comparable qualification and degrees and diplomas, so forth and so on. So it is actually something market driven. And I think philosophy is very important because it has a prescriptive role, no, a rational reflection on the ideal of the educated man. It has a regulative role over technique, over procedures, over methodology. And we have to be careful about this. That's why philosophy should be part or should have essential role in policy making. Why? Because philosophy is a guardian of how we look at humanity. That education should be human and education should humanize. In other words, as like Immanuel Kant would say, we should not treat the human person like a means. No, we should treat it as an end. The danger of education nowadays is treating the human person like a product, like a commodity, like something to be market in order for something to be competitive, in the name of progress and development. But I think we have to go back to the things themselves, what education is all about. I think education should provide a better view of oneself, a better view of the world, and we will be able to have a kind of, as Paul Ricoeur would say, a battle for meaning that creates the future as a theater of hope. And I think all this happening, the market-driven education is actually just an accidental. I said in my paper that there are a lot of renowned thinkers, no, that transform the world, which are not product of these measurable outcomes, no, as standardized in education. So I think philosophy plays a big role here, as that has a prescriptive role over technique, procedures, and methodology. Just like, no, the philosopher king, no, that would regulate, no, the relationship between the soldiers and the artisans, no, in order to set a good direction, which is very human and humanizing. Thank you.
If I may, Flor, before I forget what I'm about to say, first I'd like to agree with Rowie for mentioning that indeed philosophy even specific philosophy academicians have been very influential in policy making. As a matter of fact, yung senior high school philosophy courses, uh, Dr. Manny D was profoundly influential in the conception of those courses. And ang kulang sa tingin ko hindi not necessarily in policy. Yung kulang, I think, is in social critique, social involvement, no? And I would refer to that as the social function of philosophy. I think in relation to what Ruby mentioned earlier, what have we done, no, since 1940 after that message from a former senator? What have we done as a community of philosophers? I think what we can talk about is what we have not done, and what we have not done is to engage in social critique. Kaya sinasabing abstract tayo, ganyan, hindi na useful ang philosophy. We know that criticism is not true. That we believe that there's still use for philosophy, but we have to make a distinction between philosophy as critique, no, and specifically philosophy as social critique. Between that and philosophy as a kind of manual for well, Father Dennis used the word prescription, no? Pero I think I'm going to use the word prescription in another sense, no? Yung prescriptive philosophy, uh, uh, not how Father Dennis used it earlier. Pero there's a distinction between philosophy as critique and philosophy as prescription. Yung parang, I don't know, for lack of a better term, yung parang manual type of philosophy na that can solve the problems and so on. I think the main role of philosophy is critique, to show what's wrong, right? And to respond to an earlier question about teaching philosophy in the senior high school and the lack of qualified teachers. I mean, anybody could actually teach philosophy, granted that there's enough preparation. But preparation doesn't mean attending a 2-week seminar na tinatawag ng CHED na, anong tawag nila, technical term nila, retooling. A 2-week retooling session is not enough. So we also have to make a distinction between textbook-based teaching, kasi mukhang yun yung gustong gawin sa retooling, and then you just use a textbook and teach, let's say, whatever, logic or philosophical anthropology, or in the senior high school, yung mga courses nila sa senior high school. So we have to make a distinction between textbook-based teaching and research-based teaching. And what I mean by research-based teaching is, regardless of whether you're a philosophy major, I think it's necessary, it's a conditio sine qua non to actually read. And so that, and read, I mean, it doesn't have to be philosophy books, pero of course you have to read if you're going to teach Descartes or Kant, and then you have to really at least read them, no? exert the effort to read them, and learn the once you learn the language, really you overcome the language, you overcome the jargon. You cannot overcome the jargon, I think, if you resist it and end up not reading. I think overcoming the jargon means I call this, you overcome it, you take it, but then pwede mo na itapon afterwards once you've understood what uh, like Heidegger or any philosopher. Of course, there's no pure understanding in philosophy or no full understanding in philosophy, but that's also part of the struggle. As if I may borrow, Father Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I borrow a line from Ricoeur, philosophy is the constant struggle with text. Kung hindi ka
That's correct.
nagbabasa at magtuturo ka ng philosophy, you rely on a textbook written by some obscure author, uh, talagang mahihirapan ka. And then, yeah, I agree that there has been difficulty. Yung last question, sorry, yung last question, I agree with whoever asks the last question. Pero yun nga yung point ko rin sa aking sharing earlier, that there's a difficulty difficulty for administrators to understand the value of philosophy because they're wearing horse blinders. They're not looking at the value. Parang ibang value yung kanilang tinitignan. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking too much of your time.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot has been going on as well at the chat box, and there are suggestions about taking baby steps, Facebook groups, and sharing of sources. And indeed, sabi nga po ni Robert Frost, no, we cannot just stop by the woods. We have miles to go before we sleep. That even if we stop in this webinar, in this panel discussion, surely these people will meet and talk, and we can join as well to make our work, the profound work, better. And at that point, for the interest of time, since it's already 12:44, we thank our speakers, our panelists, for their insights, and for the members of the audience who participated in this exchange. We will not stop here, and we hope to do more about what we have talked about. And so at this point, may we have on screen the certificate to be presented to our panelists as our way of expressing our gratitude.
Before that, Floor, may I just take the opportunity to thank once again our friends,
Yes, sir.
Rowie, Ruby, Father Dennis,
Thank you very
Vida, and
much.
Jack. Thank you very much for agreeing to be with us today. I'm really elated. I'm very happy. And of course, this is just a starting point. We are not going to end with this discussion. We have not really, as a matter of fact, we have not accomplished anything today. So hindi pa tayo nag-uumpisa, mag-uumpisa pa lang tayo. So hopefully, in the succeeding invitations, you'll still find time to join us. So thank you very much.
Yes, and a happy note, magkakaedara na po tayo dito. So siguro nasa atin na po yung
Ay,
nasa
oo nga
atin
pala,
na yung
we are in the same.
nasa atin na ang mga malalaking gawain. And so we hope magsama-sama po tayo uli para gumabay at gumawa ng malaki para sa filosofiya sa Pilipinas, pati na rin sa edukasyon. So maraming salamat.
Maraming
At
salamat.
uulitin po natin to. So i-flash po natin ang certificate. So this certificate is to be presented to our speakers, and it reads, University of Santo Tomas, Faculty of Arts and Letters, Department of Philosophy, hereby awards this certificate of appreciation to the following speakers: Dr. Paolo A. Bolaños, Dr. Jacqueline Cleovas, Ms. Rowena Azada-Palacios, Dr. Vida Mia Valverde, Dr. Ruby Suazo, and Father Dennis Edralin. for sharing their expertise during the panel discussion entitled Philosophy in the Academe Towards a Shared Excellence Framework of Teaching and Research as part of the conference organized on the occasion of the 125th anniversary of the Faculty of Arts and Letters and the 10th anniversary of the Department of Philosophy, with the theme Further Challenges and Prospects, held on the 31st of July 2021. So signed by our Dean, Professor Marilu Madruño, PhD, and our Department Chair, Associate Professor Jovito Carino, PhD. Maraming salamat po. And as we said a while ago, sa uulitin po at magkikita-kita pa po tayo. Our gratitude.
Maraming salamat, Flor. Maraming salamat sa inyo, the speakers and the Department of Philosophy, sa lahat ng nandito ngayon. Maraming salamat. And have
Thank you also for the invitation. Thank
And
you.
Yes.
good morning, Rowie.
Yeah.
Salamat.
So,
Ayan, maliwanag na.
may araw na. So we
We're
will
going
end
to be
our...
on lockdown again next week.
I heard.
So, I don't know.
Please say my prayers for
Yes.
everyone.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone.
So,
Stay
everyone,
safe, everyone.
we direct our participants to the chat box for the evaluation form. You have to accomplish that to get a certificate. And for closing remarks, we will have a video from our department chair. And we will formally end this event by singing the University of Santo Tomas hymn. And so this has been your moderator, Flor de Lis Altes Albela. And as I say, magkikita pa po tayong muli, mag-uusap pa tayong muli. So stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you, Ma'am Flor. Yes.
Maraming salamat, Ma'am Flor, at maraming salamat po sa lahat na dumalo dito sa ating culminating conference called Further. Conference that we organized for the 125th anniversary of the Faculty of Arts and Letters and also for the 10th anniversary of the Department of Philosophy. Marami po tayong dapat ipagpasalamat sa nakaraang 10 taon, unang 10 taon ng department. And we would like to close this anniversary activities with, and also this conference with some notes of thanks. No? Ito pong 10 taon ng department ay utang ng departamento sa maraming tao, sa maraming taong bumuo at nagmalasakit dito sa ating departamento. Siguro po, una nating banggitin, for example, si Ma'am Joyce Ariola, who was instrumental in taking care of the department when it was first assigned to her as custodian after nalipat po tayo from social sciences area to humanities area. Para for a while, si Ma'am Joyce yung nag-alaga sa atin. And then a year after that, the department was organized under the leadership of Professor Dr. Alfredo Ho. And we would remember na ang ating grand activity agad, to make our presence felt, so to speak, yung ating quadricentennial Tomasian Conference. No? After that po, after a year of Dr. Ko's leadership, doon na po nagsimula yung almost a decade of Sir Pau's era. No? At doon po sa almost a decade na yon, we saw the full blossoming of the department. Nagkaroon po, na-regain po natin yung ating recognition from CHED as Center of Excellence. Nagkaroon po tayo ng maraming tie-ups with institutions, both locally and globally. Nakita po natin yung recognition likewise for Critique and accreditation of Critique. Nagkaroon din po ng maraming publications, both books and journal articles and opinion pieces written by the different members of the department. At lahat pong ito ay nangyari not just because of Sir Pau's initiatives, but also because of the support and encouragement of our deans. No? Nandiyan po si Dean Michael Basco, and now we have with us Dean Marilu Madrunyo. And of course, yung pong tulong siyempre ng mga kasama natin sa department. Lahat tayo, no, from the most senior hanggang po sa most junior, trying to help the department, no, to achieve its goals and plans. Besides the members of the department, the faculty members, malaking tulong din po yung tulong ng mga graduate students natin, no, from the UST Graduate School and also yung ating mga undergraduate students. And for this conference, we likewise need to thank yung ating mga naging resource persons. No? We started with Brother Carl Gaspar, followed by Dr. Jan Teres Andres, and then Dr. Van Norden, Brian Van Norden, and then of course for today we have with us Dr. Cleofas, Dr. Rowie, and Dr. Vida, Dr. Suazo, Father Edralin, and of course Doc Pao. Needless to say, we also need to thank yung ating mga moderators, si Rochi, Ma'am Gina, Course Anton on the third session, and then for today, Ma'am Flor. Siyempre, hindi po mawawala din sa eksena, although wala pala sila sa eksena because they are always behind the monitor, yung ating Oplan members. Gian, Aldrin, Paula, Anton, Jessie. So, ito po ang ating culminating conference, but it does not mean na ito na yung magiging huling-huli talaga. Like I said, ito pong unang taon ay first among the many decades to come. Sana po mananatili tayo magtutulungan at sana po we will keep on motivating, supporting, and encouraging one another. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga sa kanilang lahat.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. We miss the campus.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. God bless.
Stay safe po.